My name's Ira Summer. I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. Our speakers are the GovInvest back room, the people who make all of this happen from our actuarial team. I'll be introducing each of them when they get to their topics, but you're going to be hearing from Nina Pileggi, Jacob Putnam, and Tina Hogbro. The few quick things before we start the topics themselves. First of all, I want to let you know that we will be sending out a recording as well as a copy of the slide deck after the conclusion of the webinar. So you don't need to screenshot everything. You don't need to take too many notes to keep track of it. Everything we've got here, we're happy to share. Second of all, if you have questions during the webinar, use the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box as we go along and taking your questions and relaying them to our speakers. If it's something that I know we're going to get to, then I'll just let them keep going. And if it's something for all of them, we'll wait to the question information at the end. If in the middle of the night, you wake up frantically tonight going, oh my God, I really wish I had had the chance to ask this question. Email the question to us at info@govinvest.com. We will we'll build a response together and send it to you along with any questions we don't get a chance to respond to during the webinar itself. And just to let you know, our next webinar is going to be the third Wednesday in October, October 21st at 11 a.m. Pacific time. We've got a real exciting topic planned, but we will be sending out information on it sometime before the end of the month. So be looking for the email and put it on your calendar so you can join us next month for our discussion. So today's topics, you may be wondering where we came up with these topics. These are questions that our staff has been getting from you, our clients. And so we've been responding to these questions on a regular basis. So we wanted to bring these answers to everyone so that everyone gets a better understanding. So these are about as exciting as actuarial topics get. If you wonder what actuaries talk about if they were ever invited to parties, this is the kind of thing you would be hearing. We're going to be spending a little time talking about actuarial assumptions, what they are, how they're used, when is CalPERS going to be updating theirs, and when they do, given all of the hopefully once in a generation things that have been happening this year, how are they going to take them into account? And what are they going to do to be projecting forward during times when it is really difficult to know what's going to be happening? Next topic, we'll be talking about the cost sharing, the CalPERS risk pools. We'll let you know which risks, how the risk pools work, who gets in, and what risks are being shared, and which things you have control over on your own. And then finally, we're going to get to the retiree health plans and talk about OPEB. So we'll talk about the current cost structure, what's happening in that, and how what we see and have heard is going to be happening in the future, which things are being impacted by COVID-19 and some of the other events that are going on right now. So without further ado, I want to bring to you your first speaker today, talking about the subject of actuarial assumptions. Please welcome to the screen, Jacob Putnam.
Hi there, it's glad to be there. Glad to be here with you today and to talk a little bit about our actuarial assumptions. So first of all, what are actuarial assumptions and what are they used for? So an actuarial assumption is really kind of an actuary's best guess or best estimate for future experience. It's the, there's the purpose, and the purpose of good actuarial assumptions are to kind of ensure that the fund has stable contribution rates and to give us an accurate picture of the plan's financial position. And we want to accurately value changes, right? So all of the work that we do as actuaries, all the liabilities that are calculated are based on these actuarial assumptions. And so they have to be sound, they have to be pretty good assumptions. We're not perfect, but we feel like we're pretty good at setting our assumptions. And there are actuarial standards that we have to comply with in setting actuarial assumptions.
Now, Jacob, when you're talking about changes, are you talking about changes in assumptions, changes in benefits, actions taken by the local agencies?
Yes, all of the above. Right. Those are all things that can affect the assumptions that we use in valuing the plan's liabilities.
So it's important for people to make decisions that they have some accurate information.
Exactly. Correct.
Okay.
All right. So assumptions, that they can kind of basically be placed into kind of two buckets, the different types of assumptions. And those would be economic and demographic assumptions. Those are kind of how we look at our different types of assumptions. And the types of economic assumptions would be inflation assumptions, your investment return assumption, and your assumption for salary growth in the plan. Those are things that we consider economic assumptions. And some examples of demographic assumptions would be your retirement, disability, death, and termination decrements. Right, so we look at the rates of retirement, rates of disability, rates of death, and rates of termination. We have assumptions for each of those types of decrements. So as somebody ages through the population or ages through their work experience, work life at an agency, or we have expectations for those different types of things that could happen to them while they're working. They could retire, they could go out on disability, they could possibly die, or they could, quit and, or be terminated. And so these are all things that affect the costs of the plan, that affect the cost of the liabilities. Right. So a little bit about the process of setting demographic assumptions. Demographic assumptions are typically, and should be, based on an experience study. Now, an experience study is typically done once every 4 or 5 years, and an experience study is it's kind of a summary or summarization of actual experience usually over a defined period of time. And it can be, and it's typically based on past. So for demographic experience, or setting demographic assumptions, this is typically based on past demographic experience. For example, for CalPERS, for the last experience study, which was done in December of 2017, they reviewed data from 1997 through 2015. And so the next experience study that will be done for CalPERS will be done and probably just released sometime in late 2021, and will be based on experience through 2019. And that's a lot of data, and so we have to look at the credibility of that data. And so we typically focus on the most recent 5 to 10 year period of experience in helping us to set those assumptions. Now, it's really yet to be seen how COVID may affect these demographic assumptions. And we have to remember that COVID is, we're hoping, hopefully it's only just 1 year or so. It should just be a small piece of the puzzle, right? So we're looking at a long period of time, and it should be, like Ira said earlier, a once in a generation type of of event. And so, but it still is yet to be seen how that's going to impact the actuarial assumptions that the actuaries are going to set for these systems.
Now, Jacob, since the data they're using goes through June 30, 2019 or December 2019, and COVID hadn't really hit yet, that data isn't really going to be in the mix this time. But
right.
Yeah, they will probably be thinking about this, and hopefully by the end of 2021, knowing if it looks like there's going to be any long-term or even short-term continuing impacts at that point.
Exactly. Yes. So now for the demographic assumptions and the experience, usually when they take the experience over that 10-year period, they analyze it and break it out into subgroups, and we just analyze data. That's what we actuaries like to do. We love to analyze data. And so we put it into different types of categories, and we split up all different age, ways that we can, and to really look at the best trends that we can find and the best way to predict what may happen in the future for these types of events. So we may break it into subgroups by birthday or age, by service, by age of retirement or gender, or the type of formula, organization category, membership category, and employer type.
Right, and while it is pretty easy to understand, for example, that the risks and the disability rates associated with being a firefighter are different than the risks and disability rates that may happen from those who are working in the finance department of your agency. But I know from having been part of this process in the past, I was part of the team that was the auditing actuaries for CalPERS back in the late 90s, that sometimes we are sort of surprised by some of the things that some of the relationships that go on, seeing, and then we start tracking down to try and better understand why some of these relationships occur. So this is a time-intensive and daunting process, and as Jacob mentioned, actuaries love data and love analyzing data. The actuarial team at CalPERS is going to be starting this early next year, and it's going to be taking them most of the year to get to a place where they have assumptions that they think are their best guess as to what's going to be happening in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Ira. So here is just one example of a breakdown of one of the types of experience that would be analyzed in the CalPERS experience report. And this would be looking at death experience for 46-year-olds to 65-year-olds in one category of non-industrial deaths, right? And so what we do is we look at the raw rates, which would be the the red bars there. Those are the actual rates of death for those ages over that time period from 2005 to 2015, and compare those actual rates to what the current assumption may be, right? That kind of blue line, or proposed assumptions like the RP 2014 mortality table or the IRS database, and compare those, and kind of we need to see which one kind of fits, right? See if there's a pattern, see what type of mortality table best fits the experience. That's just one example.
Right, and one of the advantages of being a retirement system the size of CalPERS is that they're able to aggregate over many, many years and many, many people, and have enough experience, enough people who were age 62 during this time period, and either died or didn't die, so that they were able to do this analysis. What we can see from this is it looks like the rates are very similar all the way up to about right around age 60, and then the public employees don't seem to be dying as much for non-industrial deaths as the general population seems to go, which are the more standard tables. So CalPERS takes that into account, tries to understand its people and makes the best guess.
Right. So for the next, another piece of the experience study would be the economic assumptions. And unlike your demographic assumptions, your economic assumptions are not entirely based on past experience. In fact, they're based primarily on future expectations. And so the experts in the investment realm and the inflation experts, you know, the economists, they have their expectations of future experience or future inflation, future returns, for example. And so we look at those things that come from those experts, and we use a building block approach for consistency. And the investment return is primarily tied to asset allocation. Okay. So for example, here's a chart of excuse me, expected annual. This is how the expected annual inflation has compared to the actual 10 and 30-year time horizons from the last 10 years. And
yeah, I mean, what we see here is, again, the orange line, the 10-year line, is lower. So during each of these time periods, and this was from the Federal Reserve Bank, their expectation was short-term inflation was going to be a little less than long-term inflation during each of these time periods. If we continue this on right now, inflation has continued to go down. It's not just a snapshot, one-time picture. Right now, inflation is close to zero. That doesn't mean that they expect inflation to continue to be close to zero. It's a forward-looking expectation. And as the building block, inflation is the base on which everything else is built. So it's important to get a reasonable expectation of what inflation is going to be in order to be able to create the building blocks that they're going to use.
Correct. Yeah, and it's important to note also that liabilities and assumptions that actuaries use, and including return assumptions, we're always looking long term, right? 30 plus years is what we consider long-term assumptions. And because these retirement plans are not short-term plans, these are long-term plans for retirees for the future lifetime of these employees, and then some. And so we have to look at long-term assumptions, and we can't just focus on the most recent experience. We can't just focus on the now. Oh, inflation is really low, so therefore we expect inflation to be really low in the future. No, we have to, because that's not going to be the case in the long term.
Yeah, and also note right now, CalPERS is right around 2.5%. All of these numbers during this time period were below the 2.5% mark. We'll see what happens with the new rates and what's happening with the new expectations. There are offsetting influences right now with the weak economy pulling inflation down, with all of the Federal Reserve stimulus and whatever money gets used to pump up the economy, potentially creating a risk of later inflation. But we'll see how it all gets pulled in. CalPERS is going to start meetings again in early January next year to start talking about their asset allocation, and that also will end out influencing this. We'll talk about that in a moment, right here.
Right. So real investment returns are largely driven by asset allocation. And so we look at the different allocations of the fund and different expectations for those types of asset classes. And funds always have a variety of assets to spread the risk, and those different categories have different return assumptions, expectations for the future. And so that's kind of how we put together the expected returns for the funds.
And Jacob, as you mentioned before, it's a long-term perspective. So even though in the short term, CalPERS has mentioned that their short-term expectations for returns are lower than the target. Their long-term expectations are what create their target, their best guess.
Right, exactly. So for public equity, the long-term expectation may be 10% return, whereas something such as global fixed income might be maybe even higher expected return, or possibly lower. So
well, right now fixed income rates are pretty close to zero.
Sorry, fixed income rates are right close to zero. Exactly. So so as a result, based on the allocation of the fund, those are weighted and determined to give you an overall return assumption for the fund.
This is a little more in flux than normal right now. Again, CalPERS normally does an intense look at this on a regular basis and is scheduled to do that starting in January, February next year. But it's even more, it's fewer knowns than normal, because they will be having a new chief investment officer coming on board sometime soon. And a new chief investment officer is likely to have his or her own ideas as to the best way to attack the current markets. So, Jacob, anything else you want to bring up before we move to our next topic? I'll take it that's a no. Okay. Then let's go to, we're going to now talk about the cost sharing, the CalPERS risk pools with Tina Hogbro.
Good morning. I had initially hoped to put this discussion into the lyrics of Hotel California, but it just doesn't fit. So on a more serious topic, purpose of risk pools. The purpose of those, as designed, is to dramatically reduce or eliminate large fluctuations in an employer's retirement contribution rate caused by unexpected demographic events. What does that mean? Just real quickly, as we'll learn, members of risk pool member plans have 100 active lives or less. So every time something happens to one of those active lives, it has a more dramatic result on contribution rates than if that one life had experienced a loss or a gain, and the set of employees was 1,000. Just smaller numbers, you have higher fluctuations. Okay. So
yeah, so for the really small agencies, if you only have about 10 people and you get hit by one of these, a disability, then back in the old days, you would have had to pay for the full cost of that. But now the risk pools help each of the agencies deal with that, and we'll explain how.
So a little bit of history. Risk pools for public agencies went into effect with the June 30, 2003 valuations. So this affected the contribution rates of 2005. They were initially created to their benefit formula and classification. So pre-PEP, in other words, pre-PEPRA, you had 3 at 50 safety. So that risk pool contained all of the plans that had less than 100 active members who had the formula 3% at 50, and so on. So there were 10 to 12 risk pools between miscellaneous and safety. Then, of course, PEPRA came along in 2012, and the risk pools were then combined to just the classification, so miscellaneous and safety, because those benefit formulas now became closed to new entrants. And what would happen is it would skew the contribution rates because you no longer have new active employees. So then in May 2014, that just like I just said, we combined, CalPERS approved a change to combine all existing risk pools. So one for miscellaneous and one for safety. So, so who is in a risk pool? Again, if you have fewer than 100 active members, then you are automatically put into the risk pool. If a rate plan has less than, so at any time you fall under that threshold, you are put into the risk pool. And like the Hotel California, you can never leave. Okay, next. So benefits of the risk pool, how does this benefit you? This, you'll notice that you will get a consistent normal cost rate. So this is because everybody in your risk pool, if you are a member of the safety risk pool and your member plan has a 3% at 50, everybody in the entire safety pool is ran through the valuation under that formula. So this really stabilizes the normal cost. In other words, without doing this, as your population fluctuates a little bit, your normal cost will also fluctuate. Even with the stable method of entry age normal, it's less predictable with less people. So by running the entire risk pool through this formula, your formula, you really stabilize this rate. So this avoids yearly swings in normal costs, which makes planning much easier. And then of course that is your base cost. And as you know, in the back of your report, if you have non-standard benefits, such as you have a 4% COLA, or you have the 1-year final average comp, as opposed to the 3, then there's an added rate. There's an added rate that is added to your normal cost rate. And how this helps is that it becomes predictable from year to year.
Right, so you're not saying every safety member pays exactly the same rate. It's the safety members with the same formula all pay the same rate, and they have a way to figure out for every single different formula option, you can figure out what your rate is going to be, and you can plan moving forward.
Exactly. And you'll notice in your member plan val report, section 1, you'll see from year to year that these numbers remain stable. And then in section 2, the actual risk pool valuation, you'll see on page 4, you'll see the risk pool normal costs by benefit. But yes, you're correct.
And what this also means is that if you have 2 small agencies and they're both trying to hire the same firefighter, that firefighter's cost to the agency will be exactly the same. That firefighter's employee contribution rate will be exactly the same, so that there is no advantage or disadvantage. Because if you're hiring the same person and they're going through the same life experiences and the same job, this way the costs are relatively stable between agencies and gets rid of pension costs as a strategic advantage or disadvantage for any agency.
Right. So another great advantage of the risk pools is that they share the gains and losses throughout the risk pool. So as Ira alluded to, let's walk through an example. Say a particular risk pool plan, City A, its share of the safety risk pool is 0.5%, which is really pretty high for risk pools. There's so many. Unfortunately, a young fireman dies on duty. This event creates a present value liability to the plan of $1 million. Had he not died and he continued along and lived according to his actuarial assumptions, his liability would have been $20,000. So this creates what we call an actuarial experience loss of $980,000. Prior to risk pooling, as I had said, the plan would have been on the line for the full $980,000. However, because they belong to the risk pool, this $980,000 liability loss is spread throughout all members. The portion that City A will pay is their portion of the risk pool times the loss of about $4,900, and a base would be set up for that. That is this $4,900. That would be if all other assumptions were met and all other assumptions were met for everybody else in the risk pool. But what you can see is if you think about driving down a road and there are all kinds of speed bumps and potholes and speed bumps and potholes. If you're driving along on a very, very, very small bicycle, those are extremely painful and can take you out. Now, let's move into a big vehicle. Let's do an 18-wheeler. You don't even feel them. That is like the risk pool sharing. The bumps in the roads, both the highs and the lows, are smoothed out so all members share in the gains and losses. And they sort of ebb and flow. They give and take, and you'll find your experience gains and losses based on demographic experiences will be a little bit lower. And definitely you don't have to take the big hit. And of course they share, risk pools share all of the gains and losses, your assets, as well as assumptions. These are a little bit more one-to-one because your asset, if there's a massive asset loss, everybody will take that on. Assumptions are a little bit more smooth. For example, if there's a change in assumption in inflation, but you don't have, your COLA formulas are low, you may not have the hit on assumption change that somebody else would, but that is smooth throughout the entire risk pool. It makes it much more predictable. You don't have to fear something going wrong. You don't have to fear that 1% that a fireman is going to die on duty, that is going to break your plan. Or 2 years down the road, you're making these massive contributions because it's been smoothed. And everybody is, you've sort of become one big city, if you will. So that also begs the question, if we want to go to the next slide, is I want to put more money into my plan. Your city can put in a discretionary payment of maybe $1 million. That, fortunately, the way they're designed is that money actually stays with your plan. That stays with the risk pool member plan. It does not get spread throughout. Your additional contribution pays down your basis, period. So you don't have to worry about any extra money being spread out.
So yeah, so as you're thinking about what things you can do to control your costs, to get ahead of any market downturns, or just use budget surpluses when they come back again, you can still do that even though you're in the risk pool. Some agencies have asked, and they've been concerned, they don't want to take $1 million of their money and put it in if it's going to be spread and they're only going to get to see $100 of the value. But if you put in $1 million, it's all for you.
And once your bases are established, even though your bases are established by the portion that your agency is of the entire risk pool, once they're established, they're yours. They're not going to be refinanced based on risk pool changes or whatnot. I mean, you can fresh start and refinance in your own agency level, but once that base is set, that base then comes back to your agency and it's yours to pay off or enjoy if it's a gain.
So yeah, the goals of this were to try and help protect agencies from things that were less in their control, like unexpected deaths, disabilities that are just a part of the normal job. and the timing could be bad, but letting you still get the good or the bad from things that are within your control, like making extra contributions. Tina, anything else you want to talk about related to this before we go to our third topic?
No, I think this is great.
All right, thanks. Then we will get to our third topic of the day, which is OPEB, retiree health plans. And talking about that is going to be GovInvest Chief Actuary, Nina Pileggi.
Thanks, Ira. So most of you probably have an OPEB plan, and that OPEB plan could be, the medical benefits could be through CalPERS, or if you're a water agency, it could be through a water agency medical plan. But we're just going to look at CalPERS premiums in this first slide. And we're looking at the Bay Area rates specifically, but we took a look at other areas and they all showed a consistent trend here. And that trend was for the pre-Medicare rates that the premiums went up. So the new premiums for 2021 were announced and they have gone up pretty much across the board. I took an average of the increases here for the Bay Area, and the average increase was 7.6%. That's included on the slide there. Then the Medicare plans, Medicare is across all regions, actually went down overall on average. So that was a very interesting trend. And the average percent of these plans went down was 2.2%. So we have up on the and down on the post.
Now, have you seen anything as to whether this is related to less utilization because of people being shut in during 2020, or whether this was a big jump in the amount being covered by Medicare, or is this just sort of the luck of the draw that we tend to see sometimes?
Well, there was some speculation that, and that's going to be in a slide that's coming up. There was some speculation that, yes, people aren't going to the doctor as much, at least in the first half of 2020. And that is making the rates lower. And that would make sense for an older group, maybe more cautious about going out. Unfortunately, though, if people aren't getting their needed medical care now, we might see a rebound then next year as things become acute that might otherwise not have been acute if they had gone in, seeing the doctor as usual.
So yeah, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. But yeah, as you get older, there's a tendency to use more of the healthcare. So the post-65 are the people who normally would be using it the most. So it makes some sense that they have, with the cutbacks on the things that are somewhat discretionary, it's a reasonable thought that they had the biggest cutback in their use of services.
Right. All right. So let's go to the next slide. And we've graphed out those increases starting back from 2002 all the way to 2020. And you can see it's nice. The blue line is the pre-Medicare, and it has on average been trending down. We have a little uptick here now in 2021. The Medicare rates are far less stable, as you can see. But still, overall, if we smoothed out this line, we would probably see that it's trending down over time. So that's good news. But however, medical inflation is still higher than wage and price growth. So wages and price growth are measured just like inflation, medical inflation. And so we put together this graphic to show how on the left we have CPI going 2.1%, 2.4%, 1.7%, but medical inflation is much, much higher than that. And then wages outpacing inflation a little bit there, and then that same line on top. So despite the trend decreasing, we're still seeing it well above wage and price growth.
Right, which makes it again less and less affordable, and which means it becomes more and more of a concern and takes up a bigger and bigger part of your budget each year.
And it takes, yes, and it takes up a bigger part of the GDP. And this is a topic of discussion among actuaries where how, it has to plateau at a certain point because healthcare can't be 100% of GDP. It's not going to work. So that's
Right,
why
yeah.
most actuaries, if you look at your report, if you look in your OPEB report, you'll see that usually most actuaries are starting 6% trend rate for current, for the next couple of years. And then you'll see that trend down to maybe 4% because of this idea that healthcare can't take up 100% of the GDP.
Right. I will tell you right now, I'm never becoming a doctor. So it can't be everybody.
That's right. All right, so this graphic is from the PwC Health Research Institute, and it came out, this graphic came out about a month ago. And so they're showing again that downward trend. And then they were predicting for 2021. So I think CalPERS is a little ahead of the game, already announcing the premiums for 2021. And they were predicting ranges between 4% and 10% with a medium scenario of 6%. So I said that the CalPERS Bay Area premiums went up 7.6%. So somewhere above the medium prediction there. So this is an interesting graphic just in terms of where's CalPERS relationship to this is a US, all of US prediction. So CalPERS is right there in the middle. And also to see that the CalPERS trending down has also happened here, not internationally, nationally.
Right, and the U.S. is big, and there are reasons why trends will be different in different parts of the country, both because of utilization, access to, the ability to some extent, if you hop over the border to get lower prescription costs, and just different utilization rates. So,
right.
Yeah, that's part of the reason you're seeing this range.
Okay, so also from the same source, here's what they say what the 2021 trend drivers will be compared to the 2020. So at the top, we have non-emergent visits and procedures. So in 2020, as we've previously discussed, probably many people, either they couldn't, for example, in my state, elective procedures were suspended for quite some time. They couldn't go get procedures or tests, or they didn't want to because of fear of getting the virus. Now, this source thinks that in 2021, it's going to reverse. That people, they'll have to go in. They can go in, and things they put off, they just can't put off anymore. They have to go in.
I mean, that's also similar to what we saw for people without medical insurance act prior to the Affordable Care Act, which is if you put off doing your regular checkups and getting procedures done when you have time at the lower rate, when you finally get them done, they're a lot worse and more of an emergency, and the cost of it becomes a lot more expensive.
Right.
So whether this is 2021 or 2022, at some point, if people don't go back to the regular process, it's probably going to be a tougher situation for everyone.
Yes. All right, so the second line there, telehealth. Telehealth definitely went up in 2020. I personally used it myself, and it became, I don't know, all the rage, but I mean, I know a lot of steps were taken to make it more accessible, easier to use, because it was necessary. So that definitely happened. And again, in 2021, people will probably return to their more normal patterns. I think telehealth will be here to stay, especially for more rural areas where it's hard to get into providers. But I think people will return more to their past habits of going in person.
Right, and it's interesting. I mean, they talk about telehealth here as a cost increase. I think part of that is because people were just figuring out how to do telehealth.
Right, the infrastructure needed, yeah.
But it's less expensive to be able to just hop on a Zoom call and deal with your doctor than it is to go into the office and take all the time. So
Right.
the
It will
savings,
be interesting.
yeah. I mean, there's also
See how this trends.
other technology things that are coming in. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at any of those, any of the apps, the medical apps that are available to help you self-diagnose and and have your mother worry about every little thing that you tell her. Or even the other things I know, that a lot of the hospitals, insurance companies, medical areas have been doing big data just like everybody else to try and get a better handle on ways to get ahead of diseases earlier to, again, lower the cost.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of developments in these areas in the next few years. So third line, we have, well, the last three lines are all COVID related. And so testing, treatment, definitely raised costs in 2020. Let's just talk about those for 2021. Who knows for 2021 as far as testing? This particular institute thought that treatment might go down in 2021. I find that kind of interesting. And that could be just, I read the health headlines, and there are headlines about, well, not only the vaccine, hopefully, but finding more efficient ways to treat people. I think I've read that they're getting better and better at treating people, knowing what works, knowing what doesn't work. So that could take the cost down there.
Yeah, the mortality rates for those who have COVID have been going down as we've learned more and more about it. So
right.
Yeah, this is just like the learning curves that we saw up here with telehealth. There are learning curves that go on with the treatment, and once doctors start finding something that works, they start sharing the information and testing. So hopefully this is both an optimistic view that fewer people are going to have COVID next year, as well as the reality that we've learned a lot from it and we continue to learn. So those people who do get hit have a better chance of success and won't have to go through some things that, just 7 different therapies to try and guess which one works.
Right. And then the vaccine for this year is research and development mostly. Probably not going to be a widespread vaccine happening this year. And right before I got on the call, I was reading an article about even if a vaccine is available, it will take time to manufacture it, to distribute it. So it could be mid-2021 where most people get a vaccine. So definitely costs will go up there, 2021.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big questions, and again, this will also lead to the issues up here with when people can go back to doing regular procedures and living their lives, both in terms of when it's out and how well it how much people believe in the vaccine.
Right. So that topic's beyond the scope of our presentation, but what does all this mean? It means your actuaries, when they do your actuaries, when they perform your next actuarial valuation, are going to be taking all this to account, and it may affect your liabilities. Higher trend rates, lower trend rates, and then also the known CalPERS premium increases are going to affect your liabilities. So your actuaries will be looking at all these things when setting the assumptions for your next valuation.
And trends, as you mentioned before, trends tend to be, start with short-term trend rates and then smooth out to long-term trend rates, so we don't end up having, 100% of the economy. So a lot of this deals with short-term trend rates.
Yes, exactly. All right, Ira, that's what I have.
Okay. Great. So now we get the questions. We had a question come in earlier that I want to relay on to Tina, although any of our team can actually ask this. So for one agency, their pension liability has been increasing pretty rapidly. So when do you expect their pension liability to start going down? Yeah, when do you think things are going to start reversing?
I think the question refers to when, as new employees are being hired, they're put into the PEPRA plan, and the author of this question understands that will start to reduce the unfunded liability. It's going to take enough time for those that are in the classic plans to start retiring to really start to see that drop. That is really individual by plan. But if we think of today, Ira, you can interject with your experience on this. If we think of just your average plan, how many years do you, eventually all of our classic members will become retired and the population will be PEPRA only, or so few classic members that it's not going to make the difference that it does today. So it seems like, I mean, a lot of it depends on the hiring and the retiring.
Yeah, well, let's break this actually into two parts, because this sort of has two areas. The question was about pension liability, and your answer is more relating to pension costs. So for pension costs, which are a combination of paying your normal costs, which is the cost attributable to each year of service, as their population starts transitioning from the classic plans to the PEPRA plans, we're seeing a downward trend in normal cost. And where PEPRA plans started in 2013, so we're now 7 years in, and right now agencies are still largely classic, but it's getting close to the 50-50 point for a lot of agencies. Moving forward, we're going to see it becoming more and more slanted towards PEPRA. And within the next decade, you're going to see, pretty much everybody new that an agency hires will be in PEPRA. There won't be any lateral hires coming in from other agencies. So we'll start, the trend should be largely the normal cost at the PEPRA side and the cost coming down. In terms of liabilities, you've got the past liability there. Even as when somebody retires, you still have their liability there. Unfunded liabilities have been increasing over the last few years, largely because CalPERS has gotten more conservative with their assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's caused, and then those assumption changes get phased into the amortization payments,
Mm-hmm.
At least over the old rules, over a 5-year period. So for most agencies, we see that their unfunded liabilities, assuming CalPERS hits its target on everything else and doesn't change assumptions again, are still expected to increase probably through the mid-2020s, 2024, 2026, somewhere in that range, before starting to come down because the phase-in is effectively a negative amortization and causes the unfunded liability to increase for a few more years. It'll be interesting to see what this year's experience will do, the 2019-20 year, because some agencies had to cut back on their hours, some had to cut back on their people, and we won't know for a while how much that actually impacted things, and how long this downturn continues will have an impact on some of that.
And beginning in 2019, the amortization method will also be changing. It'll be a level dollar. So the payment will be consistent once it's established, given the discount rate stays the same. So there will initially be a little bit of an increase due to that because it's level dollar, and the ramping has gone away unless it's an investment gain or loss. Then there's a 5-year ramp.
Yeah. Okay, we got another question asking about whether it would make sense for CalPERS to do their next experience study for through 2020 instead of 2019 and report it later. CalPERS, both by policy and it may actually be in CalPERS law that they're required to do an experience analysis every I think 4 years. So it is they are allowed to do it more often, and if they see if something dramatic is happening like this, they may do another one. That is still possible, but they still have to do the analysis for the next year. So they'll be looking at it. If they believe that there is something important to learn from the new data, they will be looking at it. They will be coming out with something next year. I would be shocked if they didn't do the scheduled. I mean, they are absolutely doing the scheduled review of their investments and their economic side next year, even with all the uncertainty, and they will be to try and get ahead on their investments and be able to deal with that. They'll be doing the review of the economic side. Let's see what other messages are coming in here. Okay. Next question is, yeah, Tina, if you want to take this last one, this will be the last question we take for this, is will it ever be possible for an agency to catch up? As the unfunded liabilities are subject to the returns, is there any way an agency will be able to get caught up for both of the annual payments, the unfunded liability? And this is something that is being brought up by the elected officials. Tina, do you want to be the optimist or the pessimist, the good actuary or the bad actuary on this one?
Well, I want to be the optimist. Whether you call me good or bad actuary is up to you. I believe it's possible to catch up. I mean, that's why I'm in this business. That's why I took this job. That's why I work on developing the software, is to help our clients model that. There are some hurdles, like we've discussed. We had the lowering of the discount rate, which just shot up, which increased liabilities. The lowering of the wage base increased your unfunded liability amortization payments. Those things are stable now. Once we get into, of course, now we're talking about payment, but that's part of liability. Once we get into the level dollar amortization payment, your payment will be higher, but it'll be stable. As far as liabilities, if we can keep the discount rate solid and our assumptions after the new experience study, or this one, if we're able to behave according to assumption, that's not on us. And then eventually the whole idea behind the funding method of how your liabilities are calculated is so that you do catch up. We've had a series of some unfortunate events, but I do believe we will be able to get caught up.
And right, I don't know if I'm supposed to give the counterpoint. We're all going to die, but to some extent,
if there's economic downturn or our returns aren't as high, there's always that.
Yeah, I do want to. Yeah, I also want to take another long-term perspective on this, which is, and again, first I want to reiterate something Tina just said, which is CalPERS board and the CalPERS actuarial staff are listening, and they are paying attention, and they are modifying their methods and the opportunities that they offer to see the problems that have come up and try and give agency staff, your agencies, more opportunities to deal with these things. So that's why they've gotten more conservative on some of the assumptions, why they've gotten rid of some of the negative amortization for things moving forward. and they'll continue to do that. As somebody who's been doing this for a while, I do remember that the funded percentages were terrible back in the 70s and the early 80s, and then the market took off. And so there are ebbs and flows through as each generation starts going through parts of their economic cycle and their work cycle. So at some point, this will be coming back, that we won't have sort of as many. We had a recession, a market drop, market correction in 2000 to 2002. We had a recession and a market drop in 2008, 2009. We have this economic downturn going on right now, continuing who knows how long. But these things turn around, and we have things that'll come in the other direction. So by taking proper steps, getting ahead, taking proper actions, and being responsible for, as each agency is, not taking unnecessary risks, but then, hopefully not having a string of bad luck, will get us to a place where you get a chance to catch up. And hopefully having learned from the, what CalPERS did when everybody got overfunded in 1999, we won't make the same mistakes we made before, and we'll be able to allow that hopefully to continue and keep everybody in a good place at that point. We've gone through our hour. I want to thank all of you for coming to our webinar today. I do want to let you know that we will be doing this again on the third Wednesday of the month, October 21st. If you have any questions about this or anything else, just give us a call, 310-371-7106, or send us an email, info@govinvest.com. We appreciate all of you being here. We appreciate all of you just working with us and the opportunity to work with you. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for listening to our webinar today. And we hope to see you all next month. That's it for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.